Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the story of Masada. It's such an iconic place, isn't it?
It really is. And its story is so layered.
Exactly. We've pulled together quite a collection of sources, archaeology, ancient texts, modern analysis. And our aim really is to peel back those layers, maybe look beyond the most familiar stories you hear about Masada.
Yeah, because it's not just one moment in time. It's more like a convergence point for several big narratives. We're going to focus on three main ones.
Okay, so first, we'll head back to the 1st century BCE. Herod the Great. He builds this incredible fortress, these palaces, way out there in the desert.
The sheer ambition of it is staggering. Just thinking about constructing that there.
Right. Then, jump forward a bit, the Jewish revolt against Rome, around 66 to 73, maybe 74 CE, that leads to the really dramatic, famous Last Stand that Josephus writes about.
A story that's debated quite a bit, but undeniably powerful.
Definitely. And then the third story is much later how Masada became this potent national symbol, a myth almost, for the Zionist movement.
It's a fascinating case study in how history gets interpreted and, well, used.
And I guess there's a fourth story, too, the ongoing one.
Absolutely. The
Yeah.
continuous archaeology, the tourism, people are still drawn there, still exploring. It hasn't stopped being relevant.
For sure. And just to give you a sense of the scale right away, think about the Roman siege, the number of camps they built around the mountain.
And that wall, a circumvallation wall, what, about 11 kilometers long, just to box them in.
It's almost hard to picture. Such a massive effort.
Although it's interesting, there's that one Roman scholar who floated the idea it might have been partly a training exercise for the legions.
A training exercise with that much effort.
Well, during the Pax Romana, a time of relative peace. It's a fringe view, maybe, but it underlines the kind of resources Rome could deploy, even for what seems like a remote, contained rebellion.
Okay, let's dive into Herod. He built a lot, we know that. But Masada, why there? In the middle of nowhere, practically.
Well, a big part of it seems to be fear. Maybe paranoia is too strong a word, but he certainly had enemies, lots of them. Given how ruthless he could be, even with family, that fear wasn't unfounded.
So it was a refuge, a safe house, basically.
A very, very secure safe house. And it wasn't his only one, remember?
Yeah, you mentioned others.
Yeah, Herodium near Jerusalem, others near Jericho. He had this whole network of fortresses. Masada was part of that larger strategy.
But it wasn't just a bunker, was it? He built palaces up there. Real luxury.
Exactly. That's what's so striking. Not just functional, but opulent. He imported peat from Spain, apparently, for gardens
Wow.
in the desert.
Peep from Spain. That's a commitment.
It shows it wasn't just about hiding. It was about projecting power,
Mhm.
wealth, his connection to Rome,
Hmm.
showing off, essentially.
To the Romans, his own subjects.
Both, probably, demonstrating he was a valuable, sophisticated Roman ally, impressing Emperor Augustus, but also showing his own people his reach, his resources.
And the archaeology backs this up, right? The finds are pretty amazing.
Oh, definitely. Like finding wine jars labeled with the vintage, the vineyard. Maybe even grown nearby somehow.
And Italian apples.
Preserved apples, yes.
Yeah.
Various grains, legumes, even those date palm seeds they managed to grow thousands of years later. It paints a picture of a surprisingly luxurious setup.
And the garum, the fish sauce discovery.
Ah, yes, the garum. That's fascinating because the analysis showed it was kosher,
Kosher fish sauce from Rome.
made from fish with fins and scales, yes.
No.
Which ties into Herod's public persona. Privately, maybe not so observant. Think of the famous quote from Augustus.
Better to be Herod's pig than his son.
Yeah, right. But publicly, he needed to appear observant to keep his Jewish subjects somewhat on side. Importing kosher garum, which would have been a hassle, fits that picture. It's a political statement, even in his food choices.
Everything seems political with Herod. So tell us about the palace itself, the northern palace especially.
It's dramatically perched on 3 levels, sort of cascading down the cliff face towards the Dead Sea.
Stunning location.
Absolutely, yeah. The top level seems to have been for entertaining, with a sort of semicircular viewing area. Below that, a reception room, mosaic floor, frescoes. Then the lowest level had living quarters, a bathhouse, storage.
And someone described it looking like the stern of a ship.
Yes, the way it juts out from the cliff. You can imagine arriving after trekking through the desert and seeing that. It would scream power, Roman connection, control over the landscape.
And the art found there, the frescoes and stucco, top quality Roman stuff.
Very much so. Stylistically, it matches the new trends coming out of Rome under Augustus. So Herod wasn't just aware of Roman high fashion, he was importing it, displaying it. even out here.
It's kind of architectural propaganda.
I could say that, yeah. It's all part of the image.
And again, just the logistics, getting the materials, the water, the workers up there.
Monumental. It really
Oh.
speaks to the resources he commanded and his determination to build this place.
Okay, let's jump forward. Decades after Herod. The first Jewish revolt is raging. Masada becomes a refuge again, but for a different group.
Right. By 66 CE, you have about 1,000 rebels, we think, including families holding up in Herod's fortress, people escaping the fighting, the destruction in Jerusalem and elsewhere.
And the Romans decide they need to deal with this last pocket of resistance. Enter Lucius Flavius Silva.
And the 10th Legion. These guys were pros. They'd been heavily involved in the siege of Jerusalem. They knew siege warfare inside out.
So they arrive at Masada. What's the plan?
Classic Roman efficiency. Surround the mountain, build camps. We can still see the outlines of several. The main one is very clear.
Mm-hmm.
And then that massive circumvallation wall we mentioned, seal it off completely. No escapes, no supplies getting in. Standard procedure, really.
Like textbook Roman siege tactics.
Pretty much. You can even compare the camp layouts to Roman military manuals, like the one by Hyginus. They fit the pattern.
Why are these siege works so well preserved compared to other places?
Mostly the location and materials. It's remote, so not much was built over them later. And they used a lot of local stone, which lasts, unlike, say, earth and timber ramparts you might find elsewhere. Aerial surveys help map it all out, too.
Did they find much inside the Roman camps? Silva's headquarters, maybe?
They've identified the likely spot at the Praetorium, Silva's HQ, in the main camp. But the Romans won, so they packed up neatly and took their stuff.
Right.
Unlike a site like Gamla, where they found lots of Roman gear left behind after a tough fight, Masada's camps are relatively clean. The victors cleared out.
But there's that reconstructed camp near the visitor center now.
Yeah, that's based on the work of Shmuryahu Gutman. He was an early, really passionate explorer of Masada, maybe not a trained archaeologist in the modern sense, but crucial in bringing the site to light. The reconstruction gives you a feel for it.
Now, Herod built a bathhouse up there too, Roman style.
He did. But it probably wasn't the big social center that baths were in Roman cities.
More functional.
Likely, yeah. But still following the Roman bathing sequence, undressing room, warm room, hot room, caldarium, scraping down with a strigil, oils. It was a whole process, could take a good hour or more.
But alongside the Roman bath, they also found Jewish ritual baths, mikvot.
Yes, several. Some were likely built by the rebels during the revolt for purity laws. But intriguingly, at least one seems to date back to Herod's time.
More evidence of Herod keeping up appearances.
Could be. It fits that pattern of public observance we talked about.
Which brings us to the end of the siege. The really famous, tragic part of the story, as told by Josephus, the mass suicide.
Josephus gives this incredibly detailed, dramatic account. Facing capture, the leader, Eleazar ben Yair, supposedly convinces everyone to kill each other rather than become Roman slaves. Only 2 women and 5 children survive by hiding.
And the archaeological evidence, the ostraca, the pottery shards with names.
Yes. Yigal Yadin, the main excavator in the 60s, found these ostraca with single names written on them. His famous interpretation was that these were the lots Josephus described, drawn to choose the men who would carry out the killings.
A tangible link to the story?
Potentially. But there's a complication.
Oh.
They actually found more than 10 named ostraca. So it doesn't perfectly match Josephus's account of 10 executioners. It means the ostraca might have been used for something else, rations maybe?
Or the story's more complex.
Right. And Josephus includes that powerful speech by Eleazar, all about liberty, defiance.
That speech is hugely influential in how Masada's story is remembered. But we also have to ask, who are these rebels? Josephus identifies the core group as Sicarii.
And the Sicarii had a pretty brutal reputation, didn't they?
Yes.
Assassins, extremists.
Yes, known for political assassinations, even attacking fellow Jews, like the massacre at Ein Gedi during Passover. So the defenders of Masada weren't necessarily straightforward heroes, depending on your perspective.
And Josephus himself. He wasn't there, and he was writing for a Roman audience after defecting. Crucial points. He had his own biases and wasn't an eyewitness to the final moments. It's likely the group at Masada was mixed, probably Sicarii leaders, but also refugees just trying to survive. It's complicated.
Which leads perfectly into the next phase, Masada becoming a national myth. How did that happen?
It really gained traction in the early 20th century with the rise of Zionism. The story of Jews fighting back, choosing death over slavery, resonated powerfully. It became a symbol of heroism, resilience, the never-again idea.
Even if they had to kind of smooth out the rough edges of the Sicarii story.
Well, yes. Scholars like Nachman ben Yehuda have written about how the myth sometimes selectively focused on the resistance aspect, maybe downplaying the internal conflicts or the Sicaris' extremism. Early Zionists were looking for heroic models, maybe alternatives to purely rabbinic figures, a bit like the Maccabees.
And the big archaeology digs in the 50s and 60s under Yadin must have cemented that connection.
Absolutely. It became a huge national project. Yadin was a national figure himself. The excavations seemed to provide physical proof of Josephus' story, capturing the public imagination. It was also where a whole generation of Israeli archaeologists cut their teeth. Amnon Metzger, the architect, was part of that team too.
Interesting that the full scientific reports took a long time to come out, though.
Yes, there was quite a delay, but that sometimes happens. And actually, the delay meant later analysis could use newer techniques, maybe offer more nuanced interpretations than were possible right away.
Let's talk practicalities again. How did nearly 1,000 people survive up there? Water must have been key.
Absolutely critical. They had cisterns on top to catch the little rain they got, maybe 50 millimeters a year. Not much.
Not nearly enough.
Right. The main system, built by Herod, was ingenious. Dams in the nearby wadis, the dry riverbeds, would catch flash flood waters. Aqueducts then channeled that water into massive cisterns cut into the rock partway down the mountain. That's how they could store enough water for a long siege.
Incredible engineering. Now, what about the synagogue found there?
Ah, the synagogue. Yes, a significant find. But the key thing is its date. It seems to belong to the 2nd century CE, the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, not the first revolt we've mostly been talking about.
So built later.
Yes, it looks like it was adapted from rooms that were originally part of Herod's complex, possibly stables, actually. They found horse dung under the floor.
Seriously. Okay, so how do they know it's a synagogue from that later period?
Features like benches built along the walls, and crucially, a pit of favisa or geniza, where they found fragments of scrolls, including parts of the Book of Psalms dated to the 2nd century. So it tells us about Jewish life during that later revolt, but it wasn't used by Eleazar's group.
Got it. And we should briefly mention the Western Palace, too.
Yes, that was likely Herod's main residence when he was actually staying at Masada. A big complex, probably multiple stories, lots of mosaics, frescoes, clearly very important.
And is work still going on there now?
Yes, archaeology continues. Recently, they've been focusing more on the southeastern side, looking for the actual dwellings the rebels used during the First Revolt, trying to understand more about their daily lives up there.
One last thing, the reconstruction. You see those black lines on the walls everywhere.
Right. That was the style back in the 60s and 70s, showing clearly what's original and what's been rebuilt to help visualize it. Today, archaeologists might lean more towards just preserving what's there, but for visitors, that reconstruction really helps understand the scale.
Definitely gives you a better picture.
It makes the ruins come alive a bit more.
So, wrapping this up, Masada is just so many things at once. Herod's ambition, the rebels' desperate stand, the later myth-making.
Absolutely. It's a place where archaeology and historical texts meet, sometimes confirming each other, sometimes creating more questions. The debate and interpretation continue.
Which leads us to a final thought for you listening. When you think about all these layers, the history, the archaeology, the different interpretations, what part of Masada's story stands out most to you? And how does knowing the full context, the complexities, change how you think about its meaning? Something to ponder, perhaps, as you explore the sources further.